Anyanatimrandasya Yananjalashalakaya Chakshunmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. Greetings everybody and welcome to our new Satsang, Overcoming Fear. And I know this is a big topic, and especially in these times, fear has pretty much taken over the world. And what I want to get through to everyone today is, as Guruji said, fear is just ignorance. There is no basis to fear. The Atma, your soul, has always been, will always be, and the rest of it is a divine drama. It's a Leela. And whenever we are put in fearful situations, and you allow yourself to just go through it. You don't try and avoid it. You don't take drugs, alcohol, try to find ways to ignore it. You dive into it and you let it shake you and remove whatever, dust and turkey feathers are inside of you, and then you are free of it. So avoiding fear is the wrong way to go, and diving into it and facing it is what will actually free you. And fearful opportunities are basically opportunities for you to connect with the divine. And, as Guruji says, we all create these comfort zones thinking it's going to protect us, but comfort zones are toxic. So you thinking that you're putting a cocoon around yourself to avoid being upset, being stressed, you're actually creating a toxic environment for yourself, because the soul longs to be free. And when you try to hamper that, when you try to make it just be limited, we can only do this, we can only try this, you're stopping your own expansion and evolvement. And that's when fear really hits, because anything that threatens to shake up that comfort zone becomes terrifying for you. And, as Guruji said, fear is the fear of the unknown, and you start imagining things. So actually what your mind starts imagining is what creates the fear. And the whole point to avoid fear is to go into the heart. And what I experienced when I went to California for 10 years, I thought I was going for some totally different reason. And actually what happened down there is everything I had ever been afraid of happened to me. So my husband tried to kill me. I was attacked by a cult. My child was kidnapped. I was homeless with a baby. Like, it was just one thing after another. And I felt like I was on an earthquake, on a fault line. And I talked to so many people in California who experienced the same thing. And it is on a fault line. Like, that state sits on the San Andreas fault. And I think it is actually a spiritual fault line, because everything that terrified me kept happening. And there was no way to run away from it. And every time I went through another situation, I realized that it wasn't that bad, that it wasn't that terrifying. And actually being afraid of it was worse than actually dealing with it. And that's probably the biggest lesson, is these fears, when you confront them, turn into nothing. It's like you see a huge shadow on a wall and you think it's a monster, and you turn around and see it's a little mouse in front of a light, right? So turning around and facing the source of the fear is actually the only way to deal with it. And, some of you know, I went to the ashram this summer after my mom passed away, and I was able to stay there for a couple of months. But then I had to come back to Canada, and I had been living with her for years, caring for her. So, and as a sannyas, I had no belongings, no home. And I was going back to like a wilderness. And so at first there was this little, the old habit of oh no, how am I gonna? And then immediately Guruji gave a satsang in the Babaji garden. And he said, always be centered in your heart. Like, always remember, I am sitting in your heart and everything will be taken care of. And so I immediately stopped worrying about where am I going to stay? How am I going to do this? There's a pandemic. I made my mind shut up and I went into my heart. And immediately I received an email from a friend who's not a follower, sort of thinks the spiritual path is for idiots. And yet she contacted me and said, you're probably going to need to quarantine. I called in a favor and I found a place for you to stay for free. And they've ended up becoming incredibly good friends, the people I stayed with. That's where I'm moving next after this lovely location ends next week. I'm going back to this couple who started attending darshans, had me for a vegan Christmas. Like, these souls were waiting to meet Guruji, and they ended up hosting me in their home. And there's 6 devotees in all of Canada, so it's very hard to find ones to stay with. But what's happened is Guruji keeps putting me with brand new people who are realizing they're seekers. And when I walk in the door, they're like, oh, I've been waiting for someone like you. So there is fear in stepping out of your comfort zone, but that's the only way we expand. And it's also the only way we can connect more people with their path. Because every time you wind up getting thrown out into the wilderness, there's a whole bunch of souls who have been looking for someone to give them information, and then you show up. And that's any of us, right? You don't have to be a Swami to help people and to make them realize that the world is looking scary, but there's another way to look at the world. And when I was in the middle of all this chaos in California, I was walking past the Self-Realization Fellowship bookstore, which is Paramahamsa Yogananda's group. And in the window was a quote from the Bhagavad Gita by Krishna about Kriya Yoga. So it wasn't about Atma Kriya Yoga, but it was just about the Dharma of Kriya Yoga. And it said, even a little practice of this Dharma will save you from great fear in this lifetime. And I remember thinking, whatever it is, I have to learn it because I am sick of being afraid. It seemed like my whole life I had been afraid. And even as a child, I was very afraid. So I think that was a carryover from a past life because I wasn't in a family that nurtured fear. So I was put with a family that would give me the tools to be stronger. But that debilitating fear must have followed me from the past life. And I remember not wanting to have kids. And all my friends were getting married and have kids. And I was just not, like, I was adamant I didn't want children. And someone asked me why. And I said, I have a feeling I would end up raising them alone. And now when I look at it, that's exactly what happened. I ended up raising my child alone. And it was because of a past life karma that I had to go through it. And so I had this sneaking hunch that was in the cards for me, but I was trying to avoid it. I was afraid of being a single mom. And the universe was just relentless. It knew that was the lesson. It would not let me avoid it. And I tried all kinds of things. And finally, when I was with my son's father, John, and I did get pregnant, I also ended up miscarrying. So I was like, phew, I dodged a bullet. But it turns out I miscarried a twin. So the universe tricked me into thinking I was no longer pregnant. And then all of a sudden, when I started to swell up, it was like, we sort of looked at each other like two idiots and went, are we pregnant? And I was already 7 months along. So there was no way to do anything about it. So the good thing was it was the shortest pregnancy in history. I was only aware of being pregnant for 3 months. And sure enough, you know, his dad had a complete mental breakdown, and I ended up being alone raising this child. And it was the biggest gift of my life. Like that, a lot of you have heard my story, and the chaos that I went through. He was this unbelievable angelic being through it all. And some of my friends who had all the stuff, they had the big houses and they had money and security, and their kids were awful. And I realized you're only given so many tests, right? You're never given more than you can handle. And in my case, nothing was stable in my life except that child. And I remember, you know, there were nights when I would just look at him and he'd just be playing with bugs and smiling and singing. And I made myself focus on him. And doing that got me through incredible trauma. And he's still like that. He's still a very, very light soul. And I would have missed that if I had been adamant about not having kids or trying to get an abortion or whatever. I would have missed that, and I would have had to reincarnate and come back again and have kids and then have to raise them alone. So I think some of these fears that we have in us is a knowing, a knowledge that there is something waiting for us, a karma to clear that is waiting for us. And that's what we're afraid of. And the point is, stay in your heart. That's where Guruji is, that's where God is. And here I've got a quote from Guruji. Or actually, it's the Bhagavad Gita, chapter 13, and it's Guruji's commentary on it. He says, the heart of man is superior to any other manifestation of him. The heart of man is the seat of the Lord. It is what makes humans unique. So every other being on this planet, which we've gone through, we have been every animal, every plant, you know, we've, what is it, 2.4 million incarnations before we're allowed to be human. And so maybe some fear even comes from that. The predator-prey fear, you know, just fears that followed us from other lifetimes. But Guruji's commentary is the heart of man is the highest manifestation of God. And that is why we're unique, because that heart is what allows us to have a relationship with the divine. And every time a fear happens, if you put your hands on your heart, picture him there, and take long, deep breaths, it will settle you down, because the mind is what is creating the fear. It goes into its weird, spinning, chattering mess and causes anxiety. And there's a, Guruji had, if you go onto YouTube, under the questions and answers with the master, Guruji has answered this a number of times in very beautiful ways. And he's got one talk that was called Fear or Freedom. And he said, there has always been something to fear throughout history. Now it is COVID. But can you be free when you live in fear? No, you can't. And you become paranoid. You have to follow the rules, take precautions, but do it in a relaxed way. Enjoy your home, meditate, chant the name of God, do japa. Being in panic and fear will not solve the situation, it will aggravate it. Relax, do your sadhana, trust, go inside. So the fear always comes when you've turned your attention out too much. And what he's reminding us is, even no matter what you are in, you have to stay focused in. And I had an amazing phone call last week, and it was a woman who had listened to the Surrender Satsang I have on YouTube, and she asked if we could talk. And she's in Somalia, which that name to me conjures up the most violent country in the world right now. And she, I don't know if she's in some kind of a peacekeeping position. She didn't mention what her job was, but her husband was murdered in front of her by terrorists. And every day when she goes into these regions to talk to these tribal leaders, there are attempts to poison her, to kill her. She has to take her own food and water because anything that's ever been offered to her has almost killed her. And, you know, we forget that there are people out there in life-threatening leelas, right? We're afraid of weird little things, you know, what if the bank rejects me, or, you know, some of this other stuff. And there are people out there in horrific situations. And so I did the same thing. I reminded her in chapter 13 in the Bhagavad Gita, it's the talk about the field and the knower of the field. So the field is all of this manifestation, including our body. And the knower of the field is your Atma sitting in the heart with the super soul, right? The Paramatma in your heart. And the two of you are just looking at this grand play and playing your part. And luckily, this woman's already doing that with Kriya Yoga. And I reminded her, do it and have your kids sit with you when you're doing it, because it affects the whole family. So even if you're not able to interest your kids in any spiritual practice, just the fact that you are doing it in your home is going to affect them. And it will also carry her through these situations. And when she said how her living situation is, it's amazing. Like everything she has needed has been delivered to her. Great nanny, she's living with family, beautiful place. So even though she's being tested her nervous system is being tested in a very profound way, she is being protected in an incredible way. And this is something I've experienced on this path, is for gurus to work with you, you have to have a strong nervous system. And that means you don't collapse at the slightest little calamity. And what's happened to me over all these years is I don't know even what it would take to upset me anymore, because I've just seen it all. And I've noticed that with other people who've survived traumas, is if you clear it and deal with it and forgive, you just become a witness. You start watching this world in kind of an amused way, and it stops hurting you. You know, we're in this world, but we're not of this world. So having these things, giving them the power to control you is, to me, the biggest crime, because you always have the ability to say, this situation will not own me and will not change me. You know, you look at what happened with Nelson Mandela in South Africa. He was in prison for how many years? And he came out of it as this profound being. I believe he was enlightened, because he came out wishing no one harm. He'd forgiven everybody, and he was able to do amazing things for his country because of that peace that he had found inside of him. So he didn't let being locked up for, what was it, 17, 20 years, he didn't let that describe him or be the label on him. And once he became president of South Africa, we all forgot about that, right? We didn't even see that man. We didn't see a prisoner when we saw him. We saw a powerful, peaceful soul. And so a lot of these trials that you come up against look at them as a training ground instead of something to fear. Look at them as something that will expand you. You know, it's just like athletes. They have that crazy saying, no pain, no gain. But it's almost like no fear, no gain, right? If you never have situations that shake you in your life, your nervous system will be very weak and fragile, and it won't take much to just send you off the deep end. And I know there was another statement Guruji made, and it's in a satsang he did about karma. Let's see here. The Nature of Karma is the title. It's on YouTube. And he specifically talked about the position of illness. And so he said, when an illness arises, the cure also arises. There is no illness for which there is no cure. And that may sound crazy, right? In these times with these diseases and with everything that's happening for everybody. But he said, of course you believe so much in medicine, the scientists, that they are killing you more. And he said, I have met so many people whose life is fine. They go to the doctor who says they're sick, and from there on they go downhill, which, you know, is a pretty intense statement. He says, karma has provided the cure, the freedom of the mind. You can free yourself, but for that you have to be wise. Understand the nature of your illness, inside the cause and the remedy. Outside you will be guided by those who help. If you are lazy and wait for others to just help you, you will die and be born with the same illness. So again, he's saying, don't just sort of weep and pray, help me, or, you know, and not do anything about it, not research what they've told you. I've heard so many stories of people who've been diagnosed as terminal, and they've quit their lives as they know it and gone and volunteered somewhere. They've just decided, okay, if I'm going to die anyway, I'm going to go do something to help others. And without fail, they have cured themselves. And the doctors can't explain it because these people were terminal. But just stopping living the way they were living. And a lot of times it's a corporate. I have a close friend of my family. He owned several companies down east, had a massive heart attack, and then they found cancer all through him. And he could have died. And instead, he moved out west here. He started cross-country skiing, hiking. He just became this happy-go-lucky guy, turned over the company to, you know, other executives. And he ended living for 20 more years than he was supposed to. He was supposed to have dropped dead immediately. And instead, everything went into remission. And he lived a different life. He lived a less selfish life. And that changed everything. So it seems that illnesses are usually a wake-up call for us to stop doing things the way we've been doing it. And if you don't face it this time, you will die and you will come back with the same illness. And they say that a lot of times, this is why these children are born with so-called adult diseases. It's because the disease has followed them from a past life. And so a lot of these kids end up curing themselves of non-curable diseases and then moving on with this new life. So karma is an important part of how these illnesses hit us. And I had a situation happen after I was initiated as a Swamini. My first initiation as a sannyas was in the Shaivite tradition. And I'm thinking that that might have created a battle in me, because when I was getting ready to come back to the ashram in the following summer for Guru Purnima, all of a sudden I was sick. All of a sudden my whole body was just going into chaos. And so I sent, you know, at first there was fear. I sent a note to Guruji thinking he would just go, bing, you're cured. And instead I get this very brief note. He said, go to a doctor. This could be serious. And I'm like, what? I get initiated by you. But I thought, okay, that's what he told me to do. And I hate doctors, I hate hospitals. That's why I gave birth in a hut, because I didn't want to be in a hospital. And here I was facing my greatest fear, right? The medical profession. And I was taking care of my mom, and I didn't want to frighten her. She was 95. So I said, oh, I'm going for a walk. And I walked to the medical clinic and, you know, had some first tests done. And, I go home, how's your walk? Oh, it was great. And then immediately they contacted me and they said, we're sending you for more tests. So, but every test they sent me for was walking distance from this apartment I was in with my mom. And Calgary's a massive city. And every test they got me in within days. And normally you're on a waiting list for months with social health care. And so I'd say, oh, I'm going to meet somebody for lunch. And she'd go, have a good time. And I'd go to another test. And it just kept escalating. And finally, I was with a specialist, cancer. And they said, you have to cancel this trip to Germany that you've planned, because they said, this is serious. We think you have cancer. And I said, I'm serious. I'm going to Germany. I thought if I dropped dead at his feet, so be it. But I am not canceling. And so they phoned me the next day and they said, we got you in for emergency surgery tomorrow. And the hospital was walking distance from my mom. So I just kept saying to her, oh, I'm going to go for lunch. Oh, I'm meeting a friend for coffee. And she'd go, have fun. And I'd head off to another major medical event. And so I got to the hospital. I couldn't eat. They had me there hours ahead of time to prep me. And all of a sudden, and all of the staff kept coming to talk to me about the orange and the tilak, and they were debating whether they had to take off the tulsi necklace. And I said, if something goes wrong, you can break it off. It's just wood. And it turned into this big Guruji love fest. Like all of these people who I never would have talked to were coming to meet me. And then all of a sudden this guy comes running around the corner and he goes, we can get you in early, but I don't usually drive these things, so hang on. And so he started pushing my bed through the halls, and we were smashing into people and skidding around corners. And I was laughing so hard, I was crying. It was like a comedy movie about a hospital. And they whipped me into the operating room, and one of my favorite rock and roll songs was blaring through the speakers. And I just thought, Guruji, you're hilarious. Like, this is not the way I've ever experienced the hospital. And the next thing I knew, I was waking up and they said, we've removed quite a large mass and it's being sent to be tested. And they said, now, as soon as your blood pressure and your pulse come up, we'll send you back to your room. And I looked at it, and something that had happened to me in India was, through all the meditation and yoga, my pulse sits at about 32, and it's supposed to be at 80 for a normal person. So they were going, your pulse. And I said, no, that's it. That's as high as it's going to get. And so I said, I told you not to expect the normal thing from what's going on here. So they were like, okay, sweetie. They wheeled me back to my room. And this nurse came in and she said, you haven't eaten. Can I make you some lunch? And I'm like, yeah. So she went into the nurse's kitchen, made me lunch. Same thing, this love fest started and everyone started talking to me. And I went home. They sent me home with a brochure saying, this is how to handle all the pain and bleeding that's going to happen. And I went home, felt great, cooked my mom dinner. She asked how my walk was. I told her it was great. And 2 days later, I got on a plane and flew to Germany. There was no pain, there was no bleeding, but a weird vibration that had been in me since the initiation had disappeared. And, I said to Varahi, who's the country coordinator in the US, she's become a friend. And so I told her they removed this mass, but it was benign. It wasn't cancer. And she said, oh, they took out the lingam. So her take on it was that my connection to the other lineage had become a physical thing in me and it had been removed. And I don't know if that's the case, but it seems like it was something I had to do. It was something Guruji couldn't remove because it was something from the other guru. And as soon as I got to the ashram, he waved me into the sound booth and gave me a huge hug. And he was like, welcome home. So something that could have been a terrifying situation wasn't. It ended up being this gleeful, hilarious thing that removed my fear of hospitals. Like now I'm ready to go talk to those people about Om chanting and everything else once the lockdown ends. So we never know why these events are planned. And if you fall into fear, then you're going to block all the miracles that are going to happen. And these situations expand you. And you look at some of these old folks who survived wars and depressions and everything, and you just can't rattle them, right? They've got this kind of, I know who I am, and you can't scare me, you can't intimidate me, right? They've got this amazing attitude. And that's what we need to have. We need to be fearless in this life. And no matter what comes up against you, just face it and then dive into it. Okay, what are my options? What's the worst that can happen? And a lot of times, if you just play it out, okay, well, what if I do lose my place? Oh, I could go stay with friends. Oh, I could do this. Oh, we could start traveling. Like, walk yourself through all of your options instead of clinging to the way things are and clinging to that comfort zone that Guruji says is so toxic. Okay, everybody, now it's your turn. So let's get into who's scared of what. So sometimes with a parent leaving, it's that fear of having to grow up, right? As long as the mother is there, you're still the child. You can still be the dependent or someone to turn to when there's trouble. And it is a big responsibility to finally go, I am the top, right? I am now the top of the lineage, right? Has your father also passed?
Yes, but his passing was quickly, and whenever I was thinking about him, I saw him in a light. So it was
Nice.
not trauma. He
Mm-hmm.
passed quickly, but she's dying for years, and it's it's going on and heavier and heavier.
Right.
It's different. Mother is
Mm-hmm.
different than
Yeah.
father for me.
Yeah. Mine, it was the same thing. My father, it was a very quick exit. He had
Yes.
lived a great life, and but mom didn't struggle, and I think it's because she got involved with her spiritual path quite a long time ago. Like, does your mother have any beliefs? Because sometimes a fear of dying will prolong it as well. Like if somebody is afraid of dying because they don't know what's on the other side, they don't know what to expect, they will drag out their own death. So one thing you have to be careful of is that you're not holding her in place, right? That your fear of her dying isn't keeping her from leaving.
Oh.
And sometimes they need permission to go. I've even seen that in animals where you have to tell a pet that it's okay to leave.
Mm.
It's done its job. And what I found with mom, she didn't have to struggle at all. And what happened with her passing was we'd been in lockdown together from last January. And then by May, so we were in a 1-bedroom apartment together, and my brother was bringing food. And one day in May, I said a prayer to Gurji, and I said, I need a break because it was intense going out and just being with this old woman all day. And so she immediately fell and broke her hip. So, and I was running out front of the condo to meet the ambulance, and my phone lit up with a big heart from him. And he said, I'm with her. And I hadn't said anything, right? I was so busy being there. And Gurji immediately said, I'm with her. And they carted her off to the hospital, and I had to just wave goodbye because with the lockdown, I couldn't go with her. So she went to the hospital on her own, and I would phone her every day, and she was just happy and having a great time. And so I said, you know what, I'm going to go to the ashram. And when your hip is healed, I'll come home and we'll carry on. And so I immediately flew to the ashram, and my brother let me know how her progress was. And it was like, I think in her mind, she was taking care of me. That me staying in the apartment was her having to look after me, not the other way around. And being relieved of that duty, they said she just started to sleep all day. She wouldn't eat. She was happy, and she just left, right? There was no struggle, no pain. And I think she felt obligated to stay alive for me, right? And it's because as soon as I said I'm going back to the ashram, it was like she was like, oh, good. Because whenever I said, how are you? She said, I'm just tired. I don't know why I'm still alive. I'm just tired. So, you know, you have to be careful that you aren't superimposing an obligation on her, thinking so that she's thinking she can't leave, that she's not free to leave. So why don't you just say a prayer and talk to her in the prayer and say, you've been an amazing mother, you know, thank you for everything. You are free to go. You did a great job. And just send a prayer to her, thanking her, forgiving her, right? So that the slate is clean, so she feels like it's done. Because if Guruji is already visiting her like that, he's ready to take her. Because when you have these conversations, and it's the same with forgiveness, I've had these kind of conversations with someone who's not around to forgive anymore, and I'll forgive them in a prayer, right? Because in this game board, it's a very virtual game. And as long as you have completed your side of it, it doesn't matter if the other player has, like forgiving someone who won't forgive you. It doesn't matter if they won't forgive you, that's on them, right? As far as the game is concerned, you learned your lesson.
Yes.
So it is a very virtual world. And as long as you set the mind correctly, because that's astonishing that she's got that relationship with Guruji, right? He's ready to put her on the bus and take her.
Imagine this.
So that's the other thing to remember, is he is your parent, right? The others are caregivers, right? I was just a caregiver for my son. So you are being handed back to the ultimate parent with Guruji. So don't feel you've lost anything with her moving on. Okay, what you'll actually experience is a huge expansion in what he can do with you, because he has more of your attention. So first thing, as soon as you wake up, and Guruji has told us that the strongest time to do it is during Brahma Muhurta, which is between 3 and 5 a.m. It's a special, powerful time. And once I set my mind to the fact that that's when I want to do it, I get jolted awake, even if my alarm's set for 6. I get jolted awake at 3 a.m. That's Guruji's alarm. And so I just sit up in bed and I open the chakras and I start doing it. And so that's how I start the day. Before I even get out of bed, I do a Kriya Yoga. And it's the last thing I do at night. And when you bookend the day like that, it is incredibly powerful. And when I first had PTSD from my husband trying to kill me and being homeless, I learned Kriya Yoga, which was just the first one that the world got from Babaji, and it was through Paramahamsa Yogananda's ashram. I learned Kriya Yoga, and I couldn't figure out how I was going to fit into the day having a toddler. And I had to be at work at 6 a.m. at the greenhouses, but I would get up at 5 and I made myself do it. And my whole life changed and the trauma lessened, because the trauma is not just connected to these events of this lifetime, but they are karma. So they are also connected to past life events, which is why they've had such an impact on you. And Atma Kriya Yoga clears karma. So you will be clearing that PTSD because you're clearing the karma that was around it. And if you will do that, set a reminder in your alarm or whatever it takes, because once your body has done it for a week, it's rolling. Like that first week is a struggle. I remember just the alarm going off and thinking, oh God, I can't get up so early. I'm so tired. But that's your mind trying to keep you from changing. And when you make yourself do that relentlessly, then all of a sudden you just live for it. And you don't sleep in, you don't miss it because you crave it so much. And it's because you realize that you are healing because of it. Right? And as Guruji says, I think it was in his Karma Satsang, he said that it's all about energy and vibration. Right? So every illness is about energy and vibration. Everything is made of energy and vibration and therefore can transform. Om chanting is cosmic vibration where the mind is transformed. So the body can transform and be more free. And in the Bhagavad Gita, chapter 4, verse 10, it says, freed from desire, fear, and anger, absorbed in me, taking refuge in me, and having been purified by the austerity of knowledge, many have attained their eternal relationship with me. So he's also stressing how important knowledge is, because ignorance is what creates fear, right? And so the more you learn, and I think that's why Guruji's just been relentless telling us to read the Bhagavad Gita, even if it's just a verse a day, because the more you see how the field works, like you are the knower of the field, and the more you understand how the field works, then the more you can be in charge of it. And so right now you're almost in victim mode, right? You're at the receiving end of all of this trauma. And so it's important to turn it around and remember that it is not you. It's something that's happening in the field, and you have the ability to change it by changing your vibration. Okay, so do your Atma Kriya Yoga day and night, and then your japa relentlessly, and even have Guruji playing in the background, chanting it, when you're working or driving or whatever, because you're locked into a very intense pattern because of the PTSD. And I remember that feeling of just always dreading life. I just figured, even when we were safe, I felt like any minute it wouldn't be safe again, right? So we are haunted by these past events. And that's why you have to be so diligent about training your mind to not dwell on them, to not keep going back into your past. And in a lot of cases, it's not even a past we remember, it's a past life. I know people who are afraid to fly because they think they're going to crash into a forest of trees. So obviously that's how they left the planet one time. So, when you think of all the lives we've lived, then obviously we're carrying so much baggage. And that's where you surrender to the guru, because he is the only one that can just clear it, right? He can just clean the slate. And a lot of times I'll even physically picture myself putting a load at his feet. So if you're afraid to drive, just picture yourself putting it at Guruji's feet and going, Guruji, you said you wanted to be my driver, do it. Right? Because that's his analogy. He said, I'm the driver. You're like the drunk passenger. So just Stop trying to drive, you're useless. Don't let your mind keep dwelling on these things, right? You have to train it to keep positive, right? You have to keep it looking at bright parts of life instead of darkness. And unfortunately, our society, he says society wants to be able to control people through fear. And so there's constant reminders hitting us through media, through, people, through everything about, oh, you should be afraid of this, you should be afraid of this might happen, that might happen. And he's saying you have to avoid that. You can't let that train your mind. You have to train your mind to be on the divine.
Om Namo Narayana.